My husband demanded I apologize to his mistress to save our plummeting stock prices, believing I was nothing more than an obedient accessory. He forgot that I was the architect of his entire empire, so I gave him the apology he asked for. It destroyed his legacy, wiped out his fortune, and cost him 15 years of his freedom while I walked away with everything. My name is Elena Vance. I am 34 years old, and I serve as the Chief Strategy Officer at Sterling Dynamics. To the outside world, I am the steel spine holding up the massive biomedical conglomerate that my husband fronts. Tonight, however, under the crystal chandeliers of the Pierre Hotel in Manhattan, I was merely a prop. The fundraising gala was a sea of black tuxedos and designer gowns, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and desperate ambition. I stood beside Marcus Sterling, my husband and our CEO, wearing a smile that had been practiced in the mirror for a decade. "Smile, Elena," Marcus murmured, barely moving his lips while waving at a hedge fund manager. "You look bored." "I am not bored, Marcus," I replied quietly. "I am analyzing the room. The board is watching us." That was when Sienna Blake appeared. She was the new diplomatic advisor Marcus had insisted on hiring despite her lack of credentials. She wore a red dress that was entirely too loud for a charity event. In her hand, a glass of dark Cabernet swayed dangerously. I watched her approach with the predatory grace of a shark sensing blood in the water. She stopped right in front of me, feigning a stumble. It happened in slow motion. Her wrist flicked. It was not an accident. The red wine splashed across the front of my white silk gown, soaking into the fabric like a fresh wound. "Oh my God!" Sienna shrieked, her hand flying to her mouth. "Elena, I am so clumsy. I didn't mean to. Please, I am so sorry." The music seemed to stop. Every eye in the ballroom turned to us. I stood frozen, the cold liquid seeping against my skin. I waited for Marcus to hand me his handkerchief. I waited for him to dismiss her. Instead, he let out a sharp, exasperated sigh. "Elena, for heaven's sake," Marcus snapped, his voice carrying clearly over the hushed crowd. "Can't you watch where you are going? You walked right into her." I stared at him, my blood running colder than the wine. "Marcus," I didn't move. "Stop it." He cut me off, turning his back to me to comfort Sienna. "Are you all right?" "Sienna, my wife has been very stressed lately. She is not herself. He was publicly declaring me unstable. I saw the investors exchanging looks. The narrative was being written before my eyes, and I was the villain. The fallout was immediate. The next morning, the stock ticker in my office showed Sterling Dynamics down by 0.3%. It was a minor fluctuation, but in our world, it was blood in the water. Marcus stormed into my office without knocking. He threw a tablet onto my desk. "Look at this," he demanded. "Blogs are saying the leadership is fractured. They are saying the CSO is jealous of new talent. You are damaging the brand." "Elena," I stood up, keeping my hands flat on the mahogany desk to stop them from shaking. Jealous Marcus. That woman humiliated me. It was a calculated attack. She is a vital asset for the European expansion," Marcus yelled, his face flushing red. "And right now, she feels threatened. She is threatening to resign because of your hostility." He walked around the desk, invading my personal space. The smell of his cologne, once comforting, now made me nauseous. "I have made a decision," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "To reassure the investors and to keep Sienna on the team, you need to fix this. I have scheduled a press conference for tomorrow afternoon." I frowned. "A press conference to announce the quarterly earnings." "No," Marcus said, looking me dead in the eye. "To apologize. You will publicly apologize to Sienna for your unprofessional conduct at the gala. You will say you were tired, that you acted out of confusion. You will humble yourself. Elena?" The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Sienna was not just an employee. She was not just a fling. She was the exit strategy. He wanted to humiliate me so profoundly that when he eventually filed for divorce, I would already be painted as the unstable, incompetent wife. He was trying to break me. I looked at the man I had spent 10 years building up from nothing. I saw the cruelty in his eyes. If I refused now, he would fire me for cause, citing insubordination and mental instability. I would lose my access, my shares, and my leverage. I needed time. I needed access. I needed him to think he had won. I lowered my eyes, forcing my shoulders to slump in defeat. You really think that is necessary? I asked, my voice trembling just enough to be convincing. It is the only way, he said coldly. Okay, I whispered. If it is for the good of the company, I will do it. Marcus smiled, a smug, satisfied curl of his lips. Good girl. I knew you would see reason. He turned and walked out, believing he had broken his wife. He had no idea he had just activated his worst enemy. 10 years ago, Marcus and I shared a single desk in a cramped apartment in Queens. The air conditioning was broken, and our diet consisted of cheap coffee and instant noodles. But we had fire in our bellies. Back then, the division of labor was clear. I was the architect, the one who stayed up until 4 a.m, analyzing market trends and drafting the aggressive acquisition strategies that would eventually make us billions. Marcus was the face. He had the jawline, the charm, and the ability to shake a hand and make the other person feel like the only human being in the room. I built the engine. He just painted the car. As Sterling Dynamics grew into a titan of the industry, I slowly allowed myself to be pushed into the background. It started with small things. Marcus would suggest I skip a meeting to rest. Then he would crop me out of press photos, claiming the investors responded better to a singular strong leader. I told myself it was for the good of the company. I told myself I did not need the spotlight as long as the work was good. I was a fool. I had not just given him the stage, I had handed him the weapon he was now using to execute me. My thoughts drifted to Sienna. It was not just the affair that bothered me. It was the incompetence. I had reviewed her personnel file weeks ago. She had a degree in art history and zero experience in biomedical logistics, yet Marcus had appointed her to oversee our most critical supply chains in Eastern Europe. It made no sense. A girl who could not navigate a cocktail party without spilling wine was somehow navigating complex international trade regulations. My professional intuition, honed over a decade of high-stakes corporate warfare, screamed that something was wrong. The numbers did not add up. The profit margins on her projects were too consistent, too clean. Later that evening, the silence in our penthouse was suffocating. Marcus stood by the window, swirling a glass of scotch, looking out at the city lights that we had conquered together. You are spiraling. Elena, Marcus said, not bothering to turn around. It is pathetic to watch. You are 34 years old, and you are acting like a jealous teenager. I sat on the edge of the velvet sofa, wringing my hands together. Marcus, I do not understand why she has so much authority. Her department is handling millions of dollars in logistics. I just want to ensure he spun around, his face twisted in mock pity. See, this is exactly what I mean. You are paranoid. You are aging. Elena, and you are terrified of being replaced. So you invent conspiracies. Sienna is brilliant. She is the future of this company. You are becoming a liability. He took a sip of his drink, his eyes cold and predatory. You need to apologize tomorrow, not just for the company, but to prove to me that you are still sane. If you cannot do that, maybe we need to discuss a leave of absence for your mental health. The threat was clear. He was setting the groundwork to have me declared incompetent. I knew I had to play the part he wanted. I let my shoulders drop. I forced tears into my eyes and let my voice crack. I don't want to lose you, Marcus, I stammered, looking down at the floor. Maybe you are right. I have been so stressed lately. I want to understand. I want to respect her like you do. I looked up at him, widening my eyes in a plea for mercy. If I could just see her project files, just the overview, if I can see the good work she is doing, I think it would help me write a sincere apology. I want to mean it when I say I am sorry. Marcus laughed softly, a sound devoid of warmth. He saw a broken woman begging for reassurance. He did not see the shark circling the bait. Fine, he sneered, pulling his phone out. I will authorize your access to the secure drive for tonight. Read them, educate yourself, and then write a speech that saves my stock price. He finished his drink and walked to the master bedroom, leaving me alone in the dark living room. He thought he had won. He thought I was cowering in fear. I waited until the bedroom door clicked shut. Then, the tears vanished instantly. I stood up, smoothed my skirt, and walked to my private study. I sat down at my terminal and logged in. I was not looking at the screen as a wife looking for evidence of an affair. I was looking at it as a forensic auditor hunting for a discrepancy. And as the first file opened, I knew I had him. The blue light of the monitor was the only illumination in my study as the clock struck 2 in the morning. Marcus believed that granting me guest access to the project files would limit what I could see, but he had forgotten the fundamental truth of our partnership. I built this system. While he was busy shaking hands at cocktail parties 10 years ago, I was coding the encrypted infrastructure of Sterling Dynamics. I did not need his permission. I simply typed in a command line sequence I had embedded in the kernel on day 1, a backdoor key known only to me. The system yielded instantly. I was in. I was not looking at the sanitized interface Marcus saw. I was looking at the raw data streams. I immediately filtered the financial records for the projects under Sienna's supervision. I expected to find expenses for luxury hotels or jewelry disguised as business trips. What I found was far more dangerous. There were recurring wire transfers of $250,000 every Friday to a company called Azure Horizons based in the Cayman Islands. The invoices were vague, listed simply as consulting fees for diplomatic relations. Consulting fees, I muttered to the empty room. For what a master class in spilling wine, I traced the IP addresses associated with the shell company. They did not bounce back to a resort or a boutique. They routed directly to a server farm in Northern Virginia, known for hosting secure communications for unauthorized lobbying groups. My breath hitched. This was not simple embezzlement. Marcus and Sienna were using Sterling Dynamics to wash money for political entities that could not legally accept donations. I dug deeper, my fingers flying across the keyboard. If they were washing money, what was the product I accessed the data transfer logs? My stomach turned. Large encrypted packets containing our proprietary research on neural regeneration technology that was the crown jewel of our company had been sent to a private server in a non-extradition country. Sienna was not just a mistress. She was a broker for black market technology deals. And Marcus, the man who claimed to protect this company, was selling our secrets to the highest bidder to fund his gambling debts and lavish lifestyle. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. This was treason against the board, against the shareholders, and against me. I pulled a drive from my safe and began a full mirror copy. I took everything, every email, every bank statement, every falsified invoice. Then I found the personal folder on Marcus's private cloud. It was labeled simply Future. I opened the chat logs between him and Sienna. She looked like a drowned rat tonight. Sienna had written after the gala. I almost felt bad. Almost, do not waste your pity. Marcus replied, she is weak. Once she does the apology and stabilizes the stock, we execute phase 2. I am done pretending. I scrolled down, my eyes widening as I clicked on a document draft dated for 3 days from now. It was a press release. The headline read, "Sterling Dynamics announces departure of CSO Elena Vance due to severe psychological distress." The text below it was a masterpiece of cruelty. It claimed I had suffered a nervous breakdown, that I was a danger to the workplace, and that Marcus had tried everything to save me. It was the narrative he needed to trigger the morality clause in our prenuptial agreement, cut me out of my shares, and commit me to a facility while he ran off with Sienna and my money. You bastard," I whispered, my voice trembling not with sadness, but with a pure, white-hot rage. "You are never going to let me stay. You are going to bury me." I stared at his words on the screen. The man I had loved was dead. In his place was a monster who planned to strip me of my dignity and my sanity. I saved the document to my drive. The trembling in my hands stopped completely. I sat back in my leather chair and looked at the blinking cursor. I had enough evidence to send them both to federal prison for 20 years, but that was not enough. Prison was too impersonal. I wanted to watch the hope drain from their eyes in real time. I ejected the drive and hung it around my neck. The tears I had shed earlier felt like a distant memory. I was no longer a wife grieving a marriage. I was a CEO preparing for a hostile takeover. "You want a show," I said to the darkness. "I will give you the greatest show of your life." Before the sun had even risen over the Hudson River, I made the most dangerous phone call of my life. I did not use my personal cell. I used a burner phone purchased with cash to contact the private line of Catherine Vance, no relation. Simply a coincidence that amused us both, the CEO of Orion Corp., Sterling Dynamics' fiercest rival. We met an hour later at a dim underground jazz bar in Greenwich Village that was closed to the public at that hour. The air smelled of stale smoke and old mahogany. Catherine sat in a corner booth, a woman of 60 with eyes like flint, nursing an espresso. She did not offer me a hand to shake. "You are playing a dangerous game." "Elena," Catherine said, her voice low and smooth, "if Marcus finds out you are meeting with the competition, he will sue you into oblivion before lunch." I slid a leather-bound folder across the table. It did not contain the stolen data or the proof of money laundering. That was for the authorities. This folder contained something far more valuable to a corporate shark, a roadmap. "I am not here to sell you secrets, Catherine," I said, meeting her gaze steadily. "I am here to sell you a future. Sterling Dynamics is going to crash. Hard. Within 48 hours, the stock will be trading for pennies. When that happens, there will be a power vacuum." Catherine opened the folder, her eyebrows lifting as she scanned the strategic analysis I had drafted. It was a step-by-step guide on how Orion could legally absorb Sterling's market share, acquire our patent portfolio during the bankruptcy liquidation, and dominate the biomedical sector for the next 20 years. "This is aggressive," she murmured, tapping a manicured fingernail on the paper. "Why give this to me? Because when the dust settles, I need a place to land." I replied, "I want the senior vice president position at Orion, and I want a substantial stock option package. In exchange, I hand you the crown jewels of the industry on a silver platter." Catherine closed the folder and looked at me for a long moment. Then, a slow smile spread across her face. "You are ruthless, Elena." "I like that. If the stock crashes as you predict, the job is yours." We shook hands, sealing the pact. I left the bar feeling lighter than I had in years. The safety net was deployed. Now, it was time to walk the tightrope. I returned to the Sterling Dynamics headquarters just as the morning rush began. I went straight to Marcus's office. He was there with Sienna, who was sitting on the edge of his desk, giggling at something on her phone. When I entered, the laughter stopped, replaced by looks of disdain. "I have the draft," I said softly, holding out a piece of paper with trembling hands. "For the apology." Marcus snatched the paper from me. He read it aloud, mocking my tone. I apologize for my behavior. I was tired. It is weak. Elena, it sounds like a press release, not a confession. Sienna leaned over his shoulder, reading along. She scoffed. It's too dignified. She needs to sound broken. Change this part. She pointed a long, red fingernail at the page. Instead of saying, I was stressed, make her say, I was emotionally unstable and projected my insecurities onto Ms. Blake. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted iron, but I nodded. I understand. You are right. It should be clearer. Marcus took a pen and aggressively crossed out my words, scribbling his own. And add this, I am grateful for my husband's patience with my condition. Yes, that sells the narrative perfectly. They spent 20 minutes tearing apart my dignity, rewriting the speech until it was a groveling, pathetic plea for forgiveness. I took the marked-up paper back, looking at the ink that spelled out my humiliation. One more thing. Marcus, I said, keeping my eyes on the floor. If we are going to do this, maybe we should do it right. If I just read this to a few reporters, people might think it is staged. But if we live stream it to the global investors, it will show everyone how sincere I am. It will prove I have nothing to hide. Marcus's eyes lit up. He didn't see the trap. He only saw the audience. He saw a chance to broadcast his dominance to the entire world. That is actually a brilliant idea, he said, looking at me with a twisted sort of pride. Global coverage. Yes, let everyone see how magnanimous I am for forgiving you. Whatever, Sienna muttered, hopping off the desk. Just make sure you don't cry too much. It ruins the makeup. I won't, I whispered, clutching the paper to my chest. I promise. It will be a performance no one will ever forget. 24 hours before the execution of my plan, I went shopping. Marcus had laid out a dress for me on the bed, a shapeless black garment that looked appropriate for a funeral. He wanted me to look like a widow grieving the death of her own reputation. I left it on the hanger. Instead, I selected a tailored suit in crimson silk, a shade of red so vibrant it looked like fresh arterial blood. It was not the attire of a penitent wife. It was the war paint of a woman coming for the kill. I sat in my car in the underground parking garage, the engine idling. My laptop was balanced on my knees, the screen glowing with the progress bar of a massive upload. I was transmitting the encrypted data packets I had harvested, the bank transfers, the chat logs, the stolen technical schematics. I addressed the digital package to the Enforcement Division of the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Cybercrimes Unit of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I did not press send immediately. Instead, I set a delay timer. The emails were scheduled to release tomorrow at 2:30 in the afternoon, exactly 10 minutes after the press conference began. The fuse was lit. I walked into the office building, my heels clicking rhythmically on the marble floor. I needed to use the restroom, and as I washed my hands, the door swung open. Sienna walked in. She stopped when she saw me, a smirk playing on her lips. She moved to the mirror beside me, applying a fresh coat of lipstick. You look pale, Elena, Sienna said, her voice dripping with faux concern. You know, this really is for the best. Marcus needs a partner who can keep up with the global vision of the company. Once you apologize and step down, you can finally get the rest you obviously need. She leaned in closer, dropping her voice to a whisper. Just try not to embarrass him tomorrow. He has worked too hard to fix your mess. I dried my hands slowly, turning to face her. I did not flinch. I did not frown. I simply smiled, a cold, sharp expression that did not reach my eyes. Enjoy the spotlight tomorrow. Sienna, I said softly, I have a feeling. It will be the most memorable day of your life. Sienna blinked, her confidence faltering for a split second. What is that supposed to mean? It means wear waterproof mascara, I replied, walking out before she could respond. I found Marcus in the conference hall. He was obsessing over the logistics, shouting at a technician about the lighting, The massive screen behind the podium displayed the company logo and a stylized, flattering photo of Sienna with the caption, "Global Visionary." "The font is too small," Marcus yelled. "Make it bigger! I want everyone to see her name." He turned to me, his irritation evident. "Elena, give me the flash drive with your speech slides. I want to make sure the background matches the theme." I reached for the silver USB drive I always wore as a pendant on my necklace. It looked identical to the one I used for daily work, but the data inside was vastly different. I handed it to him, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Here," I said. It is just the apology text on a plain background, like you asked." Marcus plugged it into the laptop, glanced at the file name Apology Draft Final, and didn't bother opening it to check the contents. He was too arrogant to believe I would dare defy him. He ejected it and tossed it back to me. "Fine," he grunted. "Don't lose it, and don't be late." That night was the longest of my life. I lay in bed next to Marcus, listening to the rhythmic sound of his breathing. He slept soundly, the sleep of a man who believed he held all the cards. I felt a strange sensation wash over me. It was not sadness. It was the cool, refreshing wash of liberation. I slipped out of bed at 3 a.m. I did not pack clothes. I packed the things that actually mattered: my grandmother's jewelry, my hard drives, my passport. I moved them silently to the trunk of my car. I drove them to the small, furnished apartment I had leased under my maiden name 2 days prior. When I returned to the house, the sun was just beginning to gray the sky. The house was still full of furniture, but as I walked through the halls, it felt completely empty. The ghost of our marriage had finally left the building, and I was ready to burn it down. The auditorium was a pressure cooker. The air conditioning was humming on full power, but it did nothing to cool the stifling heat of 500 bodies packed into the room. Reporters, major shareholders, and employees jostled for position, their murmurs creating a low, vibrating drone of anticipation. They were here for a public execution. They wanted to see the high-powered female executive broken into pieces on live television. Marcus walked beside me, his hand gripping mine. To the flashing cameras and the watching world, he was the picture of a supportive husband guiding his fragile wife through a difficult moment. In reality, his fingers were crushing my knuckles, grinding the bones together with a painful intensity. He leaned in close, brushing his lips against my ear in a gesture that looked like a comforting whisper but felt like a knife against my throat. "Do not mess this up," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "If you stutter, if you cry too much, or if you deviate even one word from the script, I will destroy you. I will leave you with nothing." I looked up at him, widening my eyes in feigned terror. I won't. I promise. Marcus, I just want this to be over." We reached the stage. I looked down at the front row. Sienna was sitting in the center seat, directly in my line of sight. She was wearing a pale blue dress, high-necked and modest, a stark contrast to her usual provocative style. She had even worn minimal makeup to appear pale and sympathetic, playing the role of the innocent victim to perfection. She caught my eye and gave a tiny, almost imperceptible smirk, a silent command for me to kneel. I stepped up to the podium. The flash of the cameras was a physical assault, a relentless strobe light of white explosions that left spots dancing in my vision. I gripped the sides of the podium, feeling the cold metal against my palms. I looked out at the sea of faces, sensing their judgment. I took a deep, shuddering breath, letting the silence stretch out until the tension in the room was palpable. Marcus stood just a few feet behind me, to my right. He signaled to the tech booth with a subtle nod. The massive LED screen behind me flickered to life. I did not need to look back to know it displayed the words "Official Apology" in somber, gray font. "Go on," Marcus murmured, loud enough only for me to hear. I leaned into the microphone. I let my shoulders hunch forward, shrinking into myself. I lowered my gaze to the papers arranged on the lectern. Good afternoon, I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. I paused, letting a ragged breath echo through the sound system. I cast a fearful glance back at Marcus. He nodded encouragingly, a predator watching his prey finally submit. I am here today, I continued, my voice trembling with what everyone assumed was shame. I am here because my husband asked me to address the rumors regarding my conduct. I know that my actions caused distress to the company and to Ms. Blake. The room was silent. You could hear a pin drop. Marcus's smile widened slightly in the periphery of my vision. He thought I was breaking. He thought the tremble in my voice was fear. He did not know it was the adrenaline of a sniper lining up the kill shot. I stand here today to speak about the truth, I said, still keeping the quaver in my tone, about what really happened behind the scenes at Sterling Dynamics. Marcus frowned. His head tilted slightly. That line was not in the script he had written. He took a half step forward, his polished shoes squeaking on the stage floor. He was about to intervene, to guide me back to the narrative of my own insanity before I could ramble. I straightened my spine. The hunch vanished. I lifted my chin, and the fear evaporated from my face as if it had never existed. I looked directly into the center camera lens, my eyes locking onto the invisible audience of millions watching the live stream. However, I said, and this time, my voice did not tremble. It rang out with the clarity of a bell, sharp, cold, and undeniably powerful. The truth is not what you have been told. Marcus froze. The air in the room shifted instantly. The predators in the audience sensed a change in the wind. I was no longer the prey. I apologize, I said, my voice booming through the speakers, echoing off the high ceiling of the auditorium. I apologize for staying silent too long about the rot that is eating this company from the inside out. I pressed the button on the remote control concealed in my palm. Behind me, the gray slide containing the prepared apology vanished. In its place, a high-definition graphic appeared. It was a complex flowchart of financial transactions, glowing in stark red and black. To the left of the data, screenshots of encrypted text messages between Marcus and Sienna were blown up to 10 feet tall. One message, dated just 2 weeks prior, was perfectly legible to everyone in the room and the millions watching online. It read, "She is so stupid. Once the money clears in Cayman, we dump the stock and commit her." A collective gasp swept through the room like a physical wave. The sound of camera shutters transformed from a rhythmic clicking into a frantic, continuous roar that sounded like heavy rain. What is this?" Marcus shouted, his face draining of all color. "Turn it off! Cut the feed!" He lunged toward me, his hands curled into claws, his eyes wild with panic. He looked ready to strangle me on live television, but he never reached the podium. Two massive men in dark suits, private security contractors I had hired using my personal savings, stepped out from the shadows of the wings. They intercepted him, blocking his path with a wall of muscle. "Get out of my way!" Marcus screamed, spitting as he struggled against them. She is lying. This is a deep fake. Please sit down. Mr. Sterling," I said calmly into the microphone, my voice cutting through his hysteria. "I am just getting started." I pointed the remote at the screen again. The slide changed to display a series of wire transfer records. "Ladies and gentlemen, the woman sitting in the front row, Ms. Sienna Blake, is not a victim of workplace harassment," I declared, my voice steady and cold. "She is the primary signatory on a shell company in the Cayman Islands that has received over $3 million in diverted company funds in the last 6 months alone." Sienna stood up so fast her chair toppled backward with a loud crash. Her face was a mask of sheer terror. She looked left and right, searching for an exit, But the reporters had already smelled blood. They swarmed the aisle, blocking her path with a wall of microphones and flashing cameras. "That is a lie," Sienna shrieked, her voice cracking. I didn't know. He told me it was legal." "And here," I continued, ignoring her outburst as I clicked to the next slide, "are the records of Marcus Sterling's personal gambling debts in Macau, totaling $5 million. Debts that were paid off last week using the proceeds from selling our proprietary neural research to a foreign entity." The room was in absolute chaos. Shareholders were shouting questions over one another. Analysts were frantically typing on their phones. The stock price was undoubtedly crashing in real time. Just as I had predicted to Catherine, Marcus stopped struggling. He stood limp in the grip of the security guards, staring up at the screen where his entire life of deception was laid bare. He looked at me, his eyes wide with shock, finally realizing that the woman he had treated like a pawn was actually the queen who had just checkmated him. I turned to face the main camera one last time. I looked directly into the lens, imagining the board members watching from their offices in horror. "Let me be clear," I stated firmly. "This is not the jealousy of a scorned wife. This is the official report of a chief strategy officer regarding gross ethical violations and corporate espionage." I took the employee badge from my lapel and placed it gently on the podium. "I refuse to be complicit in criminal activity," I said. "I hereby resign from my position at Sterling Dynamics, effective immediately." I stepped back from the microphone, leaving the feed live, the evidence glowing on the screen, and the room descending into absolute anarchy. The double doors at the back of the auditorium flew open with a resounding crash that silenced the chaotic room instantly. It was exactly 2:30 in the afternoon. My timing was impeccable. A dozen agents wearing navy blue windbreakers emblazoned with the letters FBI and SEC stormed down the aisles, moving with the synchronized precision of a tactical unit. They did not look like they were there to ask questions. They looked like they were there to dismantle a kingdom. Marcus was still struggling against the grip of my private security guards when the federal agents reached the stage. One of them, a tall woman with a badge hanging from her neck, stepped forward and flashed a search warrant that looked more like a death sentence for his career. "Marcus Sterling," she announced, her voice cutting through the din like a knife. "You are under arrest for securities fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud." Marcus's face turned a violent shade of purple. He lunged toward me again, but the federal agents slammed him against the podium, pinning his arms behind his back. "This is a setup," Marcus screamed, saliva flying from his mouth as he thrashed against the restraints. "Elena, you did this." She planted it. She is crazy. Do not listen to her." I stood perfectly still, watching him unravel with a sense of clinical detachment. "The blockchain does not lie." "Marcus," I said calmly, my voice barely raised but carrying clearly over the microphone, "and neither do the bank records you thought were deleted." To my left, Sienna was trying to push her way through the mob of reporters, using her designer purse as a shield to hide her face. She did not make it far. 2 agents intercepted her near the exit. When the metal cuffs clicked around her wrists, she let out a wail that sounded more like a wounded animal than a human being. "Get off me!" Sienna shrieked, kicking wildly at the agent's shins. "I am just a consultant." I don't know anything, Marcus. Tell them I am innocent. You promised me Marcus could not help her." He was too busy watching his empire turn to ash in real time. The giant screen behind me, which had been displaying his crimes, switched automatically to the live stock market feed. The line for Sterling Dynamics was a vertical red streak plunging downward, a graph of pure destruction. "Look at that," I said, pointing at the screen as the numbers tumbled. "Down 60% in 12 minutes. It seems the market values integrity after all." His phone, which had fallen to the floor in the scuffle, was buzzing incessantly. I could hear the angry voices of board members and top investors screaming through the speaker, their fury audible even from where I stood. He was not just arrested, he was obliterated. I walked over to where the agents were holding him. He stopped struggling and looked up at me. His eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of absolute terror and burning hatred. He looked like a man who had woken up in a nightmare he could not control. He realized then, in that fraction of a second, that the woman he had treated like a pawn was actually the queen who had just checkmated him. I slowly twisted the diamond ring off my left finger. It was a heavy, cold weight that I had carried for too long. I held it up so the stage lights caught the stone one last time. Then I tossed it onto the table in front of him. It landed with a sharp clatter next to his handcuffs. "Here," I said, my voice devoid of any warmth. "Sell it to pay for your lawyer. Consider this, my final consulting fee." Marcus stared at the ring, then back at me, his mouth opening and closing without sound. "Elena, you can't." I didn't answer. There was nothing left to fix. I turned my back on him and descended the stairs of the stage. The cameras flashed in a blinding rhythm, creating a tunnel of white light. Reporters shouted questions at me, asking why, asking how, asking what I would do next. I ignored them all. I moved through the crowd like a ghost, untouched by the chaos I had orchestrated, my head held high. I pushed through the heavy double doors and stepped out into the cool Manhattan air. At the curb, a sleek black sedan was idling. The driver stepped out and opened the rear door. It was not a Sterling Company car. On the side of the door, discreetly embossed in silver, was the logo of Orion Corp. I slid into the leather seat and the door closed with a solid, reassuring thud, shutting out the noise of the sirens approaching in the distance. I did not look back. It has been 7 days since I walked off that stage, but the fire I lit is still consuming the news cycle. The media has dubbed the scandal Sterling Gate, a lazy moniker for a complex tragedy, but it stuck. Every news channel, every financial blog, and every social media timeline is saturated with grainy footage of Marcus being shoved into the back of a federal vehicle, his jacket pulled over his head like a common criminal. I stopped watching the news 3 days ago. I did not need to see the explosion. I was the one who planted the bomb. My lawyers made short work of the marriage, with Marcus currently residing in a federal detention center awaiting a bail hearing that was swiftly denied due to him being a flight risk. He was in no position to negotiate. His assets were frozen by the Department of Justice to pay for restitution to the defrauded shareholders. Mine, however, remained untouched. Years ago, when we were just starting out, I had insisted on an ironclad prenuptial agreement that kept our intellectual property rights and personal portfolios separate. He had signed it then with a laugh, telling me my caution was cute. That signature had just saved my entire financial future. I walked away with my personal wealth intact and a clean break, leaving him to drown in the debt he created. The ink on the divorce papers was barely dry when Catherine made her move. We stood together at a podium in the lobby of Orion Corp., a building of glass and steel that dwarfed the offices I used to share with Marcus. "Ladies and gentlemen," Catherine announced to the press, her hand resting firmly on my shoulder. "Orion is proud to welcome Elena Vance as our new senior vice president. In an industry often clouded by opacity, Elena has proven that integrity is the most valuable asset of all." The market reacted instantly. Orion's stock jumped 8% before the trading bell even rang. They did not see me as a traitor who snitched on her husband. They saw me as a whistleblower, a guardian of shareholder value. I was the hero of truth, a label that made me laugh privately in the quiet of my new apartment. I was not a hero. I was just a woman who refused to be a victim. As for Sienna, loyalty proved to be a very fragile thing when faced with a federal indictment. My sources in the district attorney's office told me she folded in the first hour of interrogation. She gave them everything: dates, times, locations of the dead drops. She painted Marcus as the mastermind and herself as the manipulated young girl. It did not save her career. She would never work in this town, or perhaps any town, ever again, but it might shave a few years off her sentence. She was ruined, a pariah whose name was now synonymous with greed and stupidity. Marcus was not so lucky. The sheer volume of evidence I provided meant he was looking at a 15-year sentence. Minimum. There would be no country club prison for him. He was facing hard time for defrauding the American public. The man who needed silk sheets to sleep was going to spend the next decade and a half on a steel cot. I stood in my new office on the 45th floor of the Orion Tower. The view was breathtaking, a panorama of the Manhattan skyline that stretched all the way to the horizon. It was higher than Marcus's office had ever been. I felt a vibration in my pocket. I pulled out my phone. It was a text message from a number I had not deleted yet. "Elena, please." The message read, "He is my son. He is crying. Please talk to the judge. You can fix this." It was his mother. The same woman who had told me at my wedding that I was lucky Marcus settled for a girl with no pedigree. I looked at the words, feeling absolutely nothing. No pity, no guilt. I did not type a reply. I simply pressed the button that said, "Block caller." The screen went black, and with it, the last tether to my old life snapped. I was finally free. 6 months have passed since the day I watched my former life crumble on live television. Tonight, the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was not a place of anxiety or humiliation. It was the stage for my coronation. I stood at the center of the room wearing a gown of midnight blue velvet, holding court as the newly appointed senior vice president of Orion Corp. The cameras that had once flashed in my face like weapons were now respectful, capturing the launch of our new neural interface technology. I was no longer the scandalous wife of a disgraced CEO. I was the architect of the industry's future. During a lull in the conversation, I glanced at a tablet resting on a nearby cocktail table. A business news ticker was scrolling across the bottom of the screen. It read, "Sterling Dynamics assets liquidated. Competitors acquire intellectual property for pennies on the dollar." The empire Marcus had built on lies and arrogance had been carved up and sold for scrap parts. I stared at the headline and waited for the surge of vindication, the rush of gloating joy I had expected to feel. It never came. Instead, I felt a profound, quiet peace. It was the feeling of walking into a house that has finally been deep cleaned after years of hoarding. The trash was gone, the air was clear, the hate had evaporated, leaving only the calm of absolute victory. "Ms. Vance." A deep voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned to see a man standing there, holding 2 glasses of champagne. He was undeniably handsome, a venture capitalist from London I had been introduced to earlier. He looked at me with an intensity that was not professional. I just wanted to say, "Your speech was incredible," he said, extending a glass to me. "I would love to take you to dinner sometime. I think we could discuss some very interesting synergies." I took the glass, my fingers brushing against his, but I did not step closer. I offered him a polite, distant smile. "I am flattered," I replied smoothly, "but my calendar is full for the foreseeable future. I am currently in a very committed relationship with my career." He blinked, surprised by the rejection, but he nodded respectfully and retreated into the crowd. I took a deep breath, savoring the solitude. I did not need a man to validate my existence. I did not need a partner to feel whole. I had my freedom, and that was more intoxicating than any romance I had ever known. I walked out onto the balcony, the cool night air brushing against my skin. I looked out at the glittering grid of Manhattan. I thought back to that moment in the auditorium, the moment Marcus forced me to the podium to apologize to his mistress. He thought he was breaking me. He had no idea he was forging me. That demand for an apology was the greatest gift he could have ever given me. It was the spark that ignited the gasoline. It gave me the permission to stop being good and start being formidable. I raised my glass of vintage champagne to the moon, to the plan. I whispered to the wind, to the secret plan that worked. I drained the glass and set it down on the stone railing. The girl who cried in the bathroom because her husband scolded her was dead and buried. In her place stood a woman who knew exactly what she was worth. Marcus had wanted a compliant, obedient wife who would smile and nod while he destroyed our legacy. He wanted a silent partner. Instead, he got a hostile takeover. He wanted me to be a good wife, I thought, a fierce pride swelling in my chest. So I chose to become a queen. I turned my back on the view and walked back toward the double doors where the board of directors was waiting for me. I pushed the doors open with both hands, striding into the room with my head held high, ready for the next conquest, leaving the ruins of the past far behind me. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. So please drop a comment down below and let me know your location and what you thought of Elena's revenge. If you enjoyed this journey, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Mia Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people.